Hello everyone and welcome back into yet another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in to today's show. Happy Tuesday to you all. We should have a great one ahead. Starting off by continuing ranking the top 5 at each different position in the MLB. Today we look at the first and second baseman at the top of the crop. Then we look at a Mavs-Lakers matchup that will be the first since that historic trade that saw Luka Doncic go to LA, and it should be a good one tonight. We're going to be talking about another potential domino that could fall this free agency cycle with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but could be the marquee story of next year's free agency period. But we're going to be talking about the potential landing spots that could happen either way. And then last but not least, if you're a Man United fan, you may want to cover your ears for this one, because I will be assessing the state of the team when this rebuild could suddenly start to get going a little bit, or if it never will in this period of time. But before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you haven't done so already, to keep up to date with all of our new content around the network. If you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves availed of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net. As always, the best way to contribute and interact with the show, whether it be through your comments, opinions, feedback, input, or even tips and donations, everything you do is genuinely appreciated, and it just makes our shows that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to them. So without further ado, let us jump right into our first segment of today's show, continuing where we kind of left off yesterday by looking at the top 5 at each different position in the MLB, starting off today with the first baseman. Again, another list that's a little bit fluid. You might be a little bit skeptical about some of the people on this list's inclusion, but ultimately, I believe that all 5 of these guys are going to have a massive impact on the 2025-26 MLB season. Whether they're playing for contenders or teams right on the precipice of doing something great, all of these first basemen will be players who are going to be massive contributors. Whether it also be offensively or defensively, that we talked about yesterday with the catchers, all of them have their one true trait that makes them stand out from the rest of the pack. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Starting off with perhaps the most controversial inclusion on this list, on a team that I believe is starting to switch to more of a small ball aesthetic, but still can contend, in my opinion, a very wide open AL East, at least outside of, say, the Yankees. I think that this team could be a dark horse in the AL this season, and might be down to this guy, Yandy Diaz, one of the best hitters in that Tampa Bay Rays lineup, one of the best defensive players in this Tampa Bay lineup. And I believe it's going to be a switch from a Rays team that I feel hit for average a lot of the time and compensated for, not having that power hitter or that number one dominant guy in the middle of their lineup, to now starting to transition into trusting youth, continuing to develop that youth, but also starting to trust more of that small ball aesthetic, like I mentioned before, where pitching is going to be the focal point of what this team does best, and potentially you're not going to see this team score as many runs as you're used to. But Yandy Diaz is certainly someone in the middle of the lineup that gives them a little bit of offensive pop. He hit .330 in 2023. Did not necessarily have his best year last year. His OPS dropped over 277 points last season. But he is still someone who can really help the outlook of this squad, bolster this team when it's needed in the middle of that lineup, and furthermore, allow for this youth movement in Tampa to get going. There are going to be a lot of young players coming up through the system in Tampa. But Yandy Diaz could be a mentor. He could be potentially, we don't often say this term in the MLB, but the bridge option for several talented infielders. And most importantly, still be a focal leader in this clubhouse. So I really love the outlook of what he's going to project to do this season for Tampa Bay. But then at number 4, a guy we're going to be talking about a lot today, Vlad Guerrero Jr. Now, I have truly believed that a lot of what has marred his reputation has stemmed from these contract talks, and most importantly because the Blue Jays haven't really done anything to supplement the roster around both him and Bo Bichette. They kind of failed in signing a guy in Pete Alonso who very certainly could have been another power bat and could have given them one of the deepest batting orders in the MLB. But I truly think that Vlad Guerrero Jr., no matter where he ends up, or even if he stays in Toronto for the time being, will be one of the premier first basemen in all of baseball. Throughout his past 132 games, he's batted .346, has had a .412 OBP, and a .588 slugging percentage, has 69 extra base hits, and 73 strikeouts only, and he only turns 26 next month. That's incredible to behold, the stats he's been able to put up throughout his career. And I feel like all these teams who are kind of in on him this season, and if he doesn't sign a new contract either with Toronto or tries to ply his straight elsewhere and this extends into next season, all the teams will be back in on him because he's just that special of a player. Now, will Toronto most likely project to be 5th in this very tough AL East? Yes. Does that mean that it will be because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. does not live up to expectations? No. Because I truly believe that he is the best player, at the very least, in terms of a pure hitting perspective on this roster. And that's why this Toronto Blue Jays team, can stay in the thick of the AL East, at least in my opinion, wild card picture. But still, it's going to come down to Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s future for the Toronto Blue Jays to project any better than that. So he remains a premier first baseman, but where he's going to end up in the long-term future is going to be the ultimate question. But at number 3, perhaps the most consistently healthy player on this list, and for this team for that matter, Mr. Matt Olson. I love this guy just because of his health on a Braves roster that has been plagued and beset by injuries for the past couple of years. And he is, in my opinion, the paragon of consistently offensively for this Atlanta Braves roster. And in a very deep NL East, he could be an X factor in deciding whether or not this Braves team can be for real this season and can make a deep run in the postseason. Last year, he actually kind of had a down year, but still his down year was exceptional in his own terms. OPS plus of 118, 29 homers, 37 doubles, 98 RBIs. And most importantly, here's the thing about Matt Olson. Ever since he signed with the Braves in the past 7 seasons, he's played in every single game, and in all of his team's games when he was still with the A's to now, in 5 of the past 7 seasons. And for a Braves team that's looking to break through in the NL, I truly believe that you have to have someone like Matt Olson in your lineup to sustain your success. And now, with the revitalization of this team, and with Ronald Acuna Jr. coming back, the youth that you have in your infield, your pitching rotation being very deep, even though you lose Max Fried to the Yankees, I think that the Braves can actually make a deeper run than people think, and maybe be the ultimate favorite in the NL East. And it's all because they have a guy like Matt Olson who they can rely upon to play consistently and consistently well, for that matter. So that's why he sits at number 3. But he sits behind a fellow NL East counterpart in Bryce Harper. And while both of them have comparable careers in that they played for very successful teams but haven't really broken through, well, Matt Olson did a couple of years ago, but turning over to Bryce Harper, he still remains one of the best contracts in MLB history, at the very least in the past decade. Right now, He's in the 7th year of his 13-year deal, and he has been one of the most successful players in the MLB during that time. He's generated 23.3 WAR and 152 home runs. And he's still only 32 years old. He has been truly a pleasure to watch throughout his MLB career, no matter where he's ended up. And now he's with the Phillies, and he's looking to make deep runs in the postseason. Now he's going to become the focal point of the NL East and this Philadelphia Phillies team. And I think that most importantly is beginning to leave a legacy in this division. This will be the year, ultimately, that he will have his 350th homer, compile his 1,000th RBI, and collect his 400th career double. That's incredible to behold. But unfortunately, there's still someone better who has stood the test of time for just a little bit longer. And that is the incomparable reigning World Series MVP, Mr. Freddie Freeman. This perhaps is going to be the last player that we're looking at here on my screen to be a unanimous selection to the Hall of Fame. That's how good Freddie Freeman has been throughout his career. He has had the most memorable postseason performance of all time, perhaps last year. Part of 2 championship teams, won the MVP award, 8 top 10 finishes, 8-time All-Star. He leads all active players in hits, runs, RBIs, and doubles, and he still has several years left in him. Injuries be damned. He is truly a marvel to watch, and he could still be the last player, one of the last players to reach 3,000 hits in this generation. And to top it all off, he's had 11 straight seasons of 21 or more home runs. We are truly looking at a living legend, and he's going to be playing for a Dodgers team that can only hope to contend for the next 5 or 10 years for as long as Freddie Freeman is playing. Let me know what you think of these rankings in the comments below, because coming next we transition to one spot over on the base pass, the second baseman, who will top that list right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you as always that if you haven't done so already, to consider availing yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to better contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly. Best way to get your opinions, feedback, input out here on air, or any tips or donations will also be genuinely appreciated, and it just makes our shows that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to them. But without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of today's show, continue ranking our top 5 in the MLB at each respective position, starting off with one over from our first baseman on the base pass, the second baseman. Another list and could see a lot of skeptics in the comments, but still a pretty fluid list. Could be interchangeable with a lot of different guys. A lot of different guys also in free agency, potentially shaking up different infields around the MLB. So who knows where some of these guys might end up. A lot of them very versatile in how many positions they can ultimately play. But I still think that this list combines a lot of versatility, power, and defensive prowess. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off at number 5, a guy who wears many hats for this New York Yankees team, may have to wear a lot more considering the fact that they've looked a little bit more defensive in terms of their approach in the offseason by signing more defensive-minded players in Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger to replace the loss of Juan Soto. But this guy certainly can be an X-factor and catalyst in terms of that offensive production that they may need throughout the year. And that will be Jazz Chisholm. This is a guy who has not just played at second base. He's been someone who has played at shortstop, center field, third base throughout his career. Very versatile player. And primarily, the reason is that the Yankees believe that defense could be an interchangeable thing for a player like Jazz Chisholm. It's his offense that what really matters to this lineup. Last year, he had 24 homers and 40 stolen bases, and those were career highs along with the number of RBIs he hit, his batting average, and games played. That just goes to show that Jazz Chisholm will forever become a little bit more important year in, year out for this Yankees squad. And so, even though the Yankees project to get better defensively, Jazz Chisholm is a reminder that this lineup still has pop within it. And this lineup can get going at any given time on the offensive side. Mark my words, y'all should still be scared of the Yankees as a offensive-minded team. So, the fact that I believe that Jazz Chisholm is the 5th best second baseman in the MLB and could still play multiple positions in the infield and outfield defensively and still put up the numbers he does offensively just go to show how versatile several players are in this Yankees roster. Now let's get to perhaps the most underappreciated, underrated player on my list. Kind of overshadowed because A, his team is not a playoff contender, and B, there have been a lot of rumors and rumblings about a certain player on this particular team who could be making his exit. But this player still needs to be acknowledged, and that's why I included him in this list. Could be forever rising up the rankings throughout his career, Mr. Brendan Donovan of the St. Louis Cardinals. And like I said, if St. Louis were a playoff contender, you guys probably would have heard his name a lot more, and he very well could be a little bit higher on this list. But to acknowledge him, he has been one of the most steadily instinctual players defensively for the Cardinals, and also really significantly impacting their offense these past 3 seasons. Has a career OBP in his 3 seasons of 364, a 116 OPS plus, 9th best mark in OAA, 13.7% K rate, and 119 WRC plus. So Brendan Donovan combines a lot of different traits that make him a very appealing prospect to rise up these rankings and be the next great second baseman. But for now, I really want to see how the St. Louis Cardinals team pans out. If the whole Nolan Arenado talks extend into the season and it becomes a bit of a distraction for a team that's already not going to contend, how will Brendan Donovan project? And also, how do a lot of these players in the Cardinals farm system coming up impact his ability defensively to actually make an impact at his preferred position? Because there could be a lot of movement in this team defensively that could see him shift potentially to the outfield where he's currently projected on ESPN to play. So Brendan Donovan is a fantastic player. And at the second base spot, I've been holding it down for the past 3 seasons aptly for this St. Louis Cardinals team. But the question will be, how will different conversations about this team impact their ultimate goal, which is to contend? And I don't really see that happening this particular season, but I do want to acknowledge a player who's kind of an aberration, what's going to be a middling team this next season. Then number 3, one of my favorite players in the MLB because he plays for one of my favorite teams, Marcus Semien of the Texas Rangers. Kind of had a little bit of a down year last year. Everyone on the Texas Rangers had a down year after winning the World Series 2 years ago. Still a 3-time All-Star. He still doesn't necessarily strike out that often, but he does have a bit of a sense of decline in his game from last season. His OBP dipped last season to 308. He still hit 23 home runs and scored 101. So you can see that even though some of these players had down years last year, they're still considered the best at their position because their down years are still exceptional years in this period of time in the MLB. But Marcus Semien is not just someone who can hit for average and power. He's someone on the defensive side of things that's really going to lock down that position for Texas for the time being. Last year, he only ranked behind Bryce Terang and Andres Jimenez in defensive runs saved. And that's pretty impressive considering the fact that the Rangers brought him in to kind of hold down this position for the next couple of years. I believe he's in his 3rd year or 4th year of his current contract. So a lot of good things to come for Marcus Semien. But we're going to have to see not just him, of this entire Rangers lineup start to hit a bit better, start to improve a bit more. Because Marcus Semien is just a small piece of what I think the Rangers are capable of doing this season. But he's a very important piece because he's one of the best, not just offensive players on this team, but defensive ones as well. So that's something to note if you're going to be following the Texas Rangers this season, and especially a guy like Marcus Semien. Let's see if he can keep up the good work defensively and get back to the numbers we expect him to put up offensively as well. Then at number 2, a great player, a rival in my many rights, Jose Altuve. And this has been a weird topic to discuss in terms of Altuve's position, just because of what happened with Alex Bregman, how he was very vocal in terms of being willing to shift to left field so that Alex Bregman could stay at his normal position in the hot corner. But I do feel Altuve is someone who has been immaculate defensively for them, but now has shown signs of regression. So I feel that if the Astros want to move him to left field, then it would be a pretty easy decision because he wouldn't necessarily be in the infield and really just thrown out there as a weaker second baseman than he was in the past. But he still is someone who could give you production and pop offensively as well. He's 35 in May, but he's still someone who can hit for power. He batted .295 last year and 185 hits and adjusted OPS plus of 126. Can reach the 2,400 hit and 250 homer benchmarks in his career, truly standing the test of time as one of the most consistent second basemen in the MLB throughout his career. But I do feel that the regression in his defensive game is reminiscent of the Astros being willing to do whatever they can to not make him a liability defensively. So who knows how he's going to project defensively, but at the very least, he's still going to hit for power for you. And that's ultimately what I think the Houston Astros need more than anything. Who cares about the defensive side of things? They need more power in their lineup, and Jose Altuve can provide that at the very least for another couple of years. But he has been supplanted at the number 1 spot by someone who I really like, Ketel Marte of the Arizona Diamondbacks, a young stud. If not for Shohei Ohtani, and if not for getting injured in the second half of the season last year, we'd be talking about Ketel Marte very much being in the MVP discussions in the NL. And he was a huge part as well of the Diamondbacks' run to the World Series just 2 years ago. He garnered 6.8 WAR in 136 games last year, had 36 homers and scored 93 runs. So in that period of time, he's really shown that he's someone who can provide pop for an Arizona Diamondbacks team that still is in that period of time where they're contending, but maybe they don't have their exact identity just yet. They got to the World Series with a combination of power and defense, not necessarily relying too much on their hitting prowess, but now they're in a period of time where they expect to contend in the NL West, and Ketel Marte is a huge reason as to why they can do it, and most importantly, as to why we can start to project this Arizona Diamondbacks team to become elite offensively. Because a lot of these younger guys are now going to start to hit for power, and combined with their ability to play defense so well and their pitching staff that's very deep, I can make a case for the Diamondbacks to compete in this league for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's highly reminiscent of players such as this, and that's why he has supplanted one of the greats at the position in the past couple of years, Jose Altuve, as the best second baseman, in my humble opinion, in the MLB going into this year. Let me know what you think in the comments below, because I truly appreciate all these players, some a little bit more than others, some maybe waiting to crack into the top 3 like Brendan Donovan and Jazz Chisholm, but ultimately I want to hear your input. But coming up next, we transition to the world of the NBA to talk about a potential revenge game. The first game between these two opponents since that aforementioned trade we mentioned earlier in this episode, the Mavs and Lakers. That game is going to be discussed right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolute.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of today's show, we're going to be previewing a big game in the NBA tonight. The first game between these two opponents since a landmark trade in NBA history went down just a couple of weeks ago. It saw Luka Doncic get sent to the Los Angeles Lakers and Anthony Davis going the other way to the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavs and Lakers face off tonight at 10 o'clock p.m. It could be a pivotal game for both of these teams. Hopes, really, and could highlight what could be certain deficiencies in their respective games. Let's start off, though, with the Lakers, because the Lakers have had a topsy-turvy kind of period with Luka Doncic. They saw what he could do against the Nuggets in potentially their best performance of the season thus far, where we had 32-10, but they're still only 2-2 ever since they got him 3-2 in their last 5 games. But now we're starting to see what this tandem of Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves can look like. We know that they're capable of putting up a lot of points night in, night out, and they did so against the Denver Nuggets. But defensively, there are still concerns, and there are still concerns about that center rotation. Is Jackson Hayes going to be anything more than a lob threat? How is Alex Len going to project? Is he just going to be a big body that they throw out there and hope can provide for you defensively, and potentially maybe as a two-way player? Or, how deep are you going to go to where guys like Trey Jameson and Christian Coloco might have to matter a little bit more, might have to impact this team? So while Luka definitely had his best game since his return from injury for the Lakers, they still are only just hovering above 500 in their past 5, and there are still questions, like I said, about their defensive prowess. And the Mavs, on the other hand, well, they got the full Anthony Davis experience to the point where he's not going to be playing this game, may not play for the rest of the season. If they get to the playoffs, hopefully he'll be back, but who knows? They still are a deep team, but they too are going to have questions asked about their front court because a lot of those integral players outside of Anthony Davis are hurt as well, in Derek Lively II and Daniel Gafford. So both of these teams heading into this one with questions in the front court, whether it just be because the Lakers' front court isn't deep or for the Mavericks it's just that they're very injured. Both of these teams are going to ask a lot of questions, or going to have asked a lot of questions over the next couple of months. But I think this is going to be an exciting game because Luka will get his chance to get a modicum of revenge, and both of these teams will learn a lot about themselves. Most importantly, if the Mavs can continue to contend without that front court. They still have elite guards, especially in the perimeter with Kyrie and Klay Thompson, but now they're going to have to rely on guys like PJ Washington and Kessler Edwards down low to help in terms of providing that rim presence on both ends. But in spite of that, the Mavs have the same record over the past couple of games as the Lakers. Yeah, they got blown up by the Warriors. They allowed 60 points in the paint, and the Lakers are brilliant in the paint as well, despite the fact that they're lacking in size. But I do think that Dallas can give them a lot of problems. Dallas is still the 8th best offense in the league, the 14th ranked defense in the league. And even without, your elite front court, Kyrie has put up 31 points in the past 5 games and the second best in the league. They can still stretch you defensively if you're the Lakers, and most importantly, they can speed you up a little bit if you're the Lakers as well. So looking at this game, it's not just about the landmark trade between these two teams just over 2 weeks ago. It's about how they've both been impacted and how, they're largely going to be viewed as contenders in the short and long terms. We can't really assess Dallas right now in terms of how they're handling the outcome of this trade just because Anthony Davis isn't out there. But assessing the depth of this Dallas team is a little bit easier because now we're starting to see that Kyrie and Klay, yes, can carry this team. Yes, they're still elite players. Yes, can stretch teams on the perimeter. But there's still more than the sum of their parts to the point where they can still hurt this Lakers team. And the Lakers, we saw the upside of what a player like Luka can bring offensively. And they delivered their best performance of the season against the Denver Nuggets team that I feel that they could face again in the postseason. But there's still questions about how JJ Redick is going to adjust in the moment if, the centers and the defense get called into question. The Denver Nuggets surprisingly didn't challenge them as much as a lot of people thought they would. Jokic, though, still kind of quote-unquote stat pad. It wasn't the most impressive game, only scored 12 points, but he got rebounds, got assists consistently, and that this team can get going in the postseason as well. So, if I'm the Lakers, I'm assessing games like this during the regular season to truly game plan for the elite Western Conference teams. Because right now, the Lakers are capable of beating anybody, but they're also capable of being beaten by anybody. And JJ Redick is a coach that has performed admirably this season with what he's had, but we haven't really seen him need to adjust much. And in the postseason, all bets are off as to how the Western Conference will play out. It's not all locked and loaded for the Lakers. There's still going to be pieces that could be added, pieces that might just not work, and most importantly, adjustments that might need to be made to ensure that the Lakers can truly contend, not just over this 5 to 10 year period that you feel they will, but this season as well. So that's why this game is more important to both teams than any other game perhaps that I've talked about since the trade deadline. And it's just a weird irony that this trade happened at that time. And I really don't think that this game will be focused on Luka's brilliance, if he does play as brilliantly as he did about a couple nights ago against Denver, it's going to be about how both these teams are going to be viewed, not just in this game, but in the long-term future. I truly believe that both of these teams are going to make the playoffs this year, and I truly believe that Anthony Davis could in fact be back by that time to make a difference in the postseason for Dallas. But I feel that a lot of people are choosing to disregard the fact that both of these teams, while you can definitely say they've gotten better, are still looking up at teams like the Thunder and the Rockets. We have to look at both the Thunder and the Rockets as dangerous teams as well the next 5 to 10 years. They're not going anywhere. The Thunder are a young core that's only going to get younger because they have a lot of draft capital, and so do the Houston Rockets. And yes, the Lakers didn't lose much in terms of the Doncic trade, in terms of the picks they still have. But are you really selling your soul to acquire a generational talent whilst you're still battling for Western Conference supremacy and now have a major center-sized hole in your lineup? I really don't know. And for the Mavs, this is more about, them feeling that Anthony Davis is the difference right now. Because I don't really see a clear path of contention for the next 5 to 10 years for the Mavericks. And now that he's injured, and he may not even be able to make an impact this season should they miss the playoffs for whatever reason, then that could be detrimental to this team's views of itself. So that's why I want to highlight both of these teams' directions. In terms of who could win this game, I very well could see a Mavs upset tonight. Remember, this is a team whose most impressive win of the season came against the Lakers a couple weeks before that trade went down when both Luka and Kyrie Irving were out with injury. That just goes to show that this team is deeper than a lot of people think. It's not just Kyrie plying his trade on the perimeter. It's Klay Thompson who still could be a big perimeter threat for them. It's not just now Anthony Davis down low who can provide two-way talent. It's PJ Washington. It's when they're healthy, Derek Lively II and Daniel Gafford. It could be someone like Kessler Edwards as well. So, overall, I feel that the Mavs have an opportunity to prove that they can stick around despite a lot of people saying they lost this trade. But for how long would be the bigger question. Because they can win a game like this any given regular season. But it's not going to matter if A, Anthony Davis doesn't make an impact, and B, most importantly, he doesn't deliver them a championship in the small window of time that I expect his career to last. Because mark my words, Luka's career is going to be a lot longer right now than Anthony Davis is. You're going to get a lot more longevity, so to speak, out of Luka. But the fact that this Dallas Mavericks team is still showing heart, still showing depth, still showing experience, leads me to believe that this team is not going to go out into the night. They're going to continue to fight no matter who's out there on the court for them. And the Lakers, yeah, they've had some good performances. Yeah, Luka looked elite against Denver. Yeah, it's a big win for them against Denver. But this Western Conference is not necessarily going to be an easy ride. And the Lakers still have most questions to me out of any Western Conference contender. Because I truly think the Thunder are ready. And I think that the Rockets can be ready. At least in a couple of years. I think, the Lakers have a lot to prove in the next couple of weeks. And they can't afford to lose games like this. But I think they might tonight. Because the Mavs are a team that can prove they're more than the sum of their parts. But let me know what you think in the comments, because this game could be bigger than just, the trade and how these teams will pan out this season. But coming up next, we transition to talk again of Vlad Guerrero Jr., but this time about where he could end up in the next year or so if he decides not to re-sign with Toronto. We're right back after this short break to talk about it.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always for the GSMC Sports Network. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we talk again about Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the elite young second baseman for the Toronto Blue Jays in his uncertain future. They still have not decided whether to extend him, re-sign him, and so this saga is now the new kid on the block in terms of MLB news. We thought that the last domino potentially fell, when Alex Bregman signed with the Red Sox, but now that this ongoing contract saga is still at its apex, we now can turn our attention to Vlad Guerrero Jr., even if it goes into the next offseason. That's how impactful this contract situation could end up being for both parties concerned, Toronto and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And most importantly, you have to realize that the Toronto Blue Jays could sign him tomorrow. This is just a hypothetical kind of experiment here, where in a bizarre world where we can talk about the future and kind of maybe predict it, I just want to give you hypothetical landing spots for if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. does ultimately leave the Toronto Blue Jays in the near future. So without further ado, let's present 4 teams that if he does not sign on the dotted line in the next couple of weeks for Toronto, could be in for his services at the very least next offseason. Let's start off with the Seattle Mariners team that are starting to become a little bit too reliant on their pitching staff. And in the AL West, that could get you by. I mean, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, and Brian Wu is an elite top 3 in the AL West. Might just be the best one in the AL West, depending on whether or not, the Texas Rangers pitching rotation capitulates due to injury. But I'll leave that alone for now. And Seattle, in terms of power, really don't have much. They do have a deep farm system, so that could be the one caveat as to why they may not sign someone like Vlad Guerrero Jr., but they're 22nd OPS and really only have 2 guys, in Cal Raleigh, your catcher, and Julio Rodriguez, who can hit for power. And how Vladimir Guerrero Jr. reflects and translates to that ballpark will matter as well, because it is, I believe, a domed ballpark over there in Seattle. But ultimately, I think it could be one of those situations where they add a power pop bat to sacrifice their farm system. Because a lot of those guys coming up to the farm system could be very promising, especially in a division that I feel is starting to get a little bit older, in my opinion. A lot of old teams, old players in the AL West. So if you decide, if you're Seattle, to sacrifice it, you're still getting a young player at the peak of his career, but you're also calling into question how you're going to be viewed by your fans if, say, a couple of those farm system kids turn into superstars. But it is a big deal because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. can make this a very elite top of the order. Now, you're looking at Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, and Vlad Guerrero Jr. Those are 3 elite power hitters, and all of a sudden you could become the best offense, maybe not just in the AL West, but the entire AL. So if I was Seattle, I would be on it, even though as a Texas Rangers fan, it would pain me to see him go there. But it's all in the name of what they believe they have in their farm system and what they're willing to give up as a whole as well. So Seattle could be on his services, but we'll have to wait and see how potentially the AL West pans out and if Seattle can truly be marketed as contenders for someone of Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s caliber, and most importantly, are willing to splash the cash to do it. Speaking of teams that might not splash the cash a lot, How about the San Francisco Giants? Definitely not a team you would suspect is going to be in on a guy like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but the reality of the situation is they need more pop in their lineup. They were a team that was seemingly in the sweepstakes for Shohei Ohtani a couple of years back, whiffed on him, lost out to their NL West rival, Los Angeles Dodgers. But I do feel the San Francisco Giants team also is in a similar situation to the Seattle Mariners, where they have a lot of young, upcoming infield talent, but they could be willing to sacrifice it. Interestingly enough, both of these teams are not known for big money moves. But if they truly feel they're in a period of time where the contention windows can be blown open by a high-profile signing, they should be all in. They can't afford to lose out to rivals in important signings in these off seasons. And so that's why both Seattle and San Fran could be intriguing candidates, just because they are in uncertain periods where they feel they can contend, but they just need more power, more pop. And Vlad Guerrero Jr. can provide that to San Fran. They don't really have, unlike Seattle, one true power hitter. Do you call a guy like Mike Yastrzemski a power hitter in that lineup? Do you call potentially a guy like Lamonte Wade Jr., who's still, in my opinion, maturing in this league, a power hitter? I don't know if you can. And the rotation certainly has a couple top-end guys. You have a guy like Robbie Ray as your top ace, and he's not too bad. But ultimately, you just need, if you're San Francisco, someone high-profile to say, we're here in that NL West. Because Los Angeles has too many times won the signatures of a lot of these elite players that you should be in for if you're San Fran. But I feel like both of these teams may take the route of farm system, because in all reality, they might play the age game. They might play the long game. They might rely on this young talent to really step up. But if I'm them, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is just right there, and he's still only 26 years old. So it wouldn't necessarily be too much of a hardship to give up a couple of those guys for a guy who's still in the prime of his career. So those two teams, in my opinion, make the most sense, just because they would immediately profile as top contenders, in my humble opinion, should they acquire his services. But two things are going against them. One, are they willing to sacrifice the young talent? And two, are they willing to splash the cash? Because ultimately, money could be the end-all, be-all here. And now, let's go to the two teams that could be very willing to splash the cash, but have another reason as to why they might not be in on his services next year as well. Because they already have made marquee signings this offseason. Let's start off, though, with the New York Mets here. And I feel like they're starting to see their approach come to light, with Steve Cohen willing to splash the cash, but also seeing what they have and assessing the young talent. They've done it with a lot of players this past season. Saw the ascension of Mark Vientos. Maybe, Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty can regain some solid form. But really, what I like about the Mets as a potential suitor for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is that it wouldn't make a ton of sense, but a lot of people will have to pay attention to what they're doing. And it might impact how a lot of these teams do business if the Mets go out and get him. Even if it means continuously splashing exorbitant amounts of money on players of Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s caliber, you would have to respect it if you're a team in a comparable situation. It would make you a little bit anxious, wouldn't it, to go to a negotiating table and the Mets have already given you this offer that you have to match, and you simply can't because they're able to give him more money. And even though it would involve a lot of rejiggering in that infield, I feel, that depth would be very pivotal for this Mets team in a very competitive NL East. Depth's going to matter in that division for the long-term future. So by adding a guy in Vladimir Guerrero Jr., would it really that heavily impact the Mets rotation? Yeah, there will be some cult favorites who might have to move elsewhere, like Jeff McNeil, guys of that ilk. But it's Vlad Guerrero Jr., and you're building a juggernaut if you're the Mets. You already swung for the fences with Juan Soto. Why not do it for Vlad Guerrero Jr. and really make yourselves a power player in the MLB? Not just with your bats, but the money as well. So that's why the Mets could definitely be a strong player next season, even though a lot of people think they're already done with business and closing shop for the time being. Because of that power, in terms of the money they have, in terms of how willing Steve Cohen is able to get to acquire certain players, that spells very well for the Mets. It spells danger for the rest of the MLB. But we'll see. And last but not least, the Boston Red Sox. This is another team that could fall in the category of both Seattle and San Fran, but I think they've steadily improved. They've made some astute signings, not just Alex Bregman, but Walker Buehler to their rotation. But I do think that they need more balance in terms of their batting order. They need more right-handed power. And I know that they, as well as the Mets, would expect a lot of movement in their infield, especially considering a lot of these young farm system guys and that very talented farm system for Boston could be coming up. Guys like Roman Anthony, guys like Meyer, guys like Christian Campbell. So there could be a lot of movement in that infield as well. Boston could need more power because who knows how these guys will pan out in all reality in the MLB. We've talked about them a lot, both Anthony and Meyer, when we ranked our top 5 MLB prospects and how they could project in this lineup. But how do we know they will translate to the MLB if we haven't really seen them in that kind of setting? So that's what really could impact a move to Boston for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Let's talk about the ultimate kind of resolution to all this. Remaining with the Blue Jays. Now, remaining with the Blue Jays could also be difficult because they added a lot of players, maybe anxiously anticipating that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. could leave. But I still think in all reality that it could work just because I feel like they still don't have the power to match up with the AL East. They need to retain as much talent as possible to ensure that they can at the very least stay afloat in that loaded division. And they most likely will finish 5th this year in that division as well. But what matters is that they don't play the money game well for Vladimir Jr. and they just let him walk. That would ultimately be an embarrassment to their reputation as an organization and ultimately would mean that this project with him and Bichette investing so much into both of those guys would be a failure. So if I'm the Blue Jays, I'm doing everything I can to steadily approach the situation and find a solution so that this project doesn't end in a bad place, because that's where it could be heading. So that's another option that could be left out there for him, and it's the most likely option that we've heard over the past couple of weeks. But if this thing extends to next offseason, there are going to be a lot of suitors for his services. But let me know what you think in the comments below. It's going to be a crazy ride to figure out where he could end up. But to conclude today's show, this is not going to be a fun segment for Man United fans if you are a fan of that specific club across the pond. I'm going to be assessing the state of them and how they can climb out of the hole they've built themselves, and if they can do it anytime soon after this short break. Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our final segment of today's show, if you're a Man United fan, you may want to cover your ears for this one because we are assessing the state of your particular club, where they are right now, how they can get out of the mess they're in, and whether it can be any time soon. Let's start off with this season and why it is going to go down as the worst in Man United history. So obviously, with the acquisition of the club, in terms of the 27.7, I believe, % stake with Ineos, there was a lot of hope and optimism that the Glazers would not have power over this team anymore and ruin it any further. Because that tenure was one of the worst, in my opinion, management of any club in world football. The Glazers truly left this club in a terrible spot, and now we're starting to see the ramifications of that. And so, while Ineos is a group that a lot of people believed would invest enough in revamping this Man United team, getting it back on track, getting it back to the club we all know to compete for Premier League titles, it's just in this purgatory of not being able to do anything. And yes, you can't necessarily not blame them either because they've made a lot of decisions thus far as the owners of Man United that have led them to this point as well. But you have to go back to then. Back to when United were under the Glazers and fans were really impertinent about their situation, to now, where they might even be worse off. And now, if you're a Man United fan, you have to ask that question. Are Ineos really that much to blame just because of what the Glazers have left them? But then, let's look at what Ineos has done throughout this season that will not be looked on very brightly by Man United fans after their tenure, if it ends up not going that well. They, in the offseason, decided to keep Erik ten Hag, retain his services, really rely on him, however, didn't necessarily splash the cash in the summer. They didn't really invest in the squad enough. That left them very thin at the striker position, and then very thin at both the left and right back positions as well. And as a result, this squad was not up to Erik ten Hag's standards. But then you look at Erik ten Hag and his tenure with United and think, well, yes, the squad is thin, but he really didn't implement much into this squad. Every single game they played under his tenure, there was no passion, there was no desire, there were no players who were willing to make a go of it. And that was why they fired him mid-season. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where I think the apex of the situation arises. Because Ruben Amorim at Sporting was doing incredible. He had a marquee win over Manchester City in the Champions League at home. Victor Gyökeres was doing great things at the striker position, and he was looking like someone who was willing to go the distance that season with Sporting, potentially lead them to great things, not just in the Portuguese league, but maybe as a dark horse competitor in the Champions League. But Ineos was quick to pull the trigger on Erik ten Hag, and they immediately said Ruben Amorim's the guy to take us back to the promised land. The problem for me is, if you're going to fire Erik ten Hag mid-season, and you're going to challenge Ruben Amorim to come into that situation mid-season, try and implement his style of football, his system, why didn't you think about firing Erik ten Hag earlier when Ruben Amorim was even more eager to take the job? That would have given him, at the very least, a summer to learn these players' habits, maybe for potentially Ineos to sign more players, and most importantly, to implement his tactical system. Because now, this system is proving too complicated for United. And without the proper pieces to implement it, this team is directionless. And it could be that way for a very long time, to the point where Amorim is at risk of getting sacked as well. And truly, that would be really, really disappointing for Man United. That would leave them very much in a hole that I don't believe they'll ever get out of. And yeah, Amorim hasn't necessarily proven that he can lead these players, inspire them. But if you're manager coming in mid-season to this moribund club, I wouldn't be able to fix that situation. Which leads me to my question. If you're a Man United fan, do you believe Amorim is the right fit, considering all that's gone on around him? And I would like to hear your opinions as well, but here is my opinion. As Matt Quinn enters the chat, my good friend from the GSMC. Hey Chris, I'm a Man United fan and nothing will change with the Glazers as the owners. Well, I truly believe that you are correct in that assessment, and I agree that the Glazers are a group that really left this Man United team worse off for that matter, than where they would be had they just gotten rid of them as soon as the fans started voicing their disapproval. But now that Ineos is in, I feel like you can't really blame the Glazers that much in terms of Ineos' decision to retain Ten Hag and then bring in Ruben Amorim. That decision, in my opinion, was clearly on Ineos. But I agree that if the Glazers had really been gone for several years, then that's when Ineos could have made more of an impact. So I agree that the Glazers were terrible owners, and perhaps the worst owners in that club's history. In this club's history, for that matter. But I do think that Ineos has also kind of compounded the issue, if that makes sense. But Amorim is an interesting case, because I think he has the right ideas. He has a system that could, in theory, work if he has the right players. But I'm starting to question if the current players have the desire to play for him anymore. And that's what matters, because you're not going to get players until the summer, and who knows if you'll still be there. So that's the big question about Amorim. I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt, just because he was placed in this very uncompromising situation. But if, you can't get the approval of the most important aspects of this rebuild, the players, then I don't know how it's going to be. And then you transition to the system, and that's where the challenge to me comes in. Because the system, this 3-4-2-1 system that gets the most out of the wingbacks and really requires kind of a target man striker to finish off the chances that this team can create, is, in theory, very impactful. As Matt Quinn also says, yeah, I don't blame Amorim for most of this mess. And I agree. But this system, in order for it to work, does need certain players. In fact, I feel that United has a lot of players that could work in the Amorim system. For example, I'm not necessarily mad if Zirkzee becomes more of a hold-up player and he drops back a little bit deeper. I feel that could work a lot. It could impact Bruno's impact on, this whole lineup, but I feel that could work. But Højlund, to me, is not a clear out-and-out striker just yet. I think he's still maturing. And then, if you go down the roster in this lineup, Dorgu is an interesting signing, but he's still only 20 years old. Dalot, to me, is someone who I actually really like and is a highly underappreciated right back. But him playing in technically a back five, if you can call it that, and being more advantage of the pitch leaves him very vulnerable for counterattacks. And then the mess that is the center back position, yeah, Harry Maguire's looked better with both Ten Hag and now Amorim but he's not going to be there in the long-term future. And then De Ligt really has been a pretty bad experiment coming over from Bayern. And I can tell you that as a Bayern fan, that could continue to happen. He's very injury prone as well, and I don't really know how he fits in to this Man United squad. Unless we say about Mazraoui, the better. But this is a team that right now doesn't really rely on the system, and as a result, you're starting to see all the players lose faith. And that's a very important factor, and that's the last thing I want to address. If these current players can't really play in the system, adjust to the system, then can Man United, and most importantly Ineos, analyze the players they want and bring them in and make sure they're the right fit for Amorim or maybe someone else if they decide to fire him, because that could be the case. I think that the fact that they failed to sign a guy like Gyökeres in the January transfer window says a lot about where they feel they stand, but they could try again in the summer. They could try and look for, more depth at the left back position, the center back positions even. Maybe another holding midfielder, because Ugarte even did not pan out, and Casemiro is another one of those players where the less said about him, the better. So ultimately, they're going to have to find the right players, sign them if they're willing to, and if Ineos is willing to splash the cash, then that's when I feel you can start to see more of this rebuild happen. But let me know what you continue to think. Thank you, my friend Matt, in the comments. Go check him out as he begins his career as the GSMC football podcast host over the next couple of months. Well, that will just about do it for my show, the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. We'll be back tomorrow, as always, 2:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I'm out for today, and I will see you all tomorrow.